morning. Thank you for joining us on the miscarriage panel for this year's baby loss awareness event. My name is Cassie Destino. I am the founder of IVF Support UAE, and I've been working with this community of women here in the UAE for the past 6 years, and it is my honor and my pleasure to join you this morning with a pretty remarkable roster of women that I'm really looking forward to introducing you to today. Today we're going to be talking about miscarriage, which is an experience that many of us have had. It's a rather big club. It's something that we don't often talk very much about. And there are all kinds of reasons for that. And we're going to hear some pretty extraordinary stories this morning about miscarriage. I myself had a miscarriage at 12 weeks after my first IVF, and I had what's known as a missed miscarriage. There are lots of different kinds of experiences that people have with miscarriage. We're going to hear about a few of them. I'm joined this morning by Caroline Wanjuru. She is from Kenya, and she's been in Dubai for about 2.5 years. She experienced a late miscarriage at 20 weeks, and afterwards she founded Still a Mum, which is a nonprofit that supports bereaved parents in Kenya. After 2 miscarriages and a blocked fallopian tube diagnosis, failed IVF cycle, Caroline conceived and had a little boy who's now 5 years old. She's passionate about supporting families through their bereavement process after they've lost a baby. We're also joined by Kavita Madhvani. She's from the United Kingdom, has been living in Dubai for the past 6 years. Kavita is the founder of a business called Plunge, which helps early stage startups by scaling their businesses. She's had 2 miscarriages and a termination for medical reasons before going on to have her daughter in December 2021. Hazel Leonard is also joining us today. She is a fertility educator and a midwife from the UK. She's been in the UAE for 10 years. She has some experience with fertility treatment and has supported lots of women through their fertility treatment, and she's supported women through miscarriage as well. Nikki Oliver is also joining us this morning. She is a UK trained midwife. She's been in the UAE for 6 years, and she is currently the lead bereavement midwife at King's Hospital, which is such an extraordinary resource for us to have here in the UAE. And we're going to be talking to everyone about their stories, and we're going to be hearing about different experiences of miscarriage. Hazel, I'd like to start with you. I'd like you to talk to us a little bit about miscarriage and how it's defined. I know that there's some difference in language around miscarriage, and talk about some of the mechanics of miscarriage and what it is, what doesn't cause a miscarriage. So we'll start with you.
Thank you, Cassie. I think the terminology used when we're talking about baby loss in general, the terminology can be slightly triggering for a lot of people. Some people feel very uncomfortable with the term miscarriage, like it's like a blame thing or something that you did. But this is the terminology, so this is what we'll use for today. But miscarriage is defined as the loss of a pregnancy, and the gestation does vary depending on where you are. So, for example, if you're in the US, the CDC definition is up to 20 weeks. So anything up to 20 weeks is a miscarriage. After 20 weeks would be a stillbirth. NICE guidelines in the UK, it's up to 24 weeks, so 23 weeks and 6 days. And actually the World Health Organization is 28 weeks. Up to 28 weeks is considered a miscarriage. And I think the terminology is what resonates with you as an individual. In this region, I don't believe that I tried to find the definition, but I couldn't find anything specific. But I think it is the terminology that you feel the most comfortable with. Miscarriage does affect 1 in 4 pregnancies, so it's extremely common. It's very likely that yourself or somebody very close to you will have had or has had or is going through a miscarriage. Once you hear the baby's heartbeat around 6-7 weeks, that does reduce to 1 in 10 pregnancies, but it's still quite quite high. Most people start investigations into, it's called recurrent miscarriage, after 2 or 3 miscarriages, depending on where you are in the world. But it's such a common thing that, unfortunately, I think historically has been, oh, you know, there's a lot of the terminology "at least," which I think has got no place in baby loss whatsoever. At least it was early. Oh, don't worry, you'll move past it. So there's been historically a tendency not to push for investigations for miscarriage, but that is definitely changing, and people are starting to push back. I'll just briefly touch on some of the most common causes. Approximately 50% is suspected to be chromosomal anomalies, but we could be looking at environmental. So is there scar tissue from endometriosis? Is it an ectopic pregnancy? Is there fibroids, hormones, those kind of things, clotting factors, autoimmune diseases? Sometimes we just don't know. Sometimes, you know, there's so much we still don't understand about why miscarriages happen. But one thing I want to focus on for anybody that's listening to this talk is what does not cause miscarriages are things like drinking coffee, having sex, exercising, using a sauna, not thinking positively enough. You know, these are the things that we're told. Being too stressed, these are the things that we're told, you know, oh, you were too stressed and that's why it happened. Very often there is something going on that is much bigger than that, like I said, we don't always understand, but it is not people's fault. You haven't lost a baby because of something that you did. It's there's normally something else going on.
And I think that's something that a lot of women really struggle with when they have a miscarriage, that they think, if I didn't eat that thing, or if I didn't take that, you know, I exercised too hard. And, you know, there's always this, you want a reason, right? You want to find out that I did this thing, and if I don't do this thing next time, then this next pregnancy will be protected. And to know that you can put your finger on a thing, and that's just not really the way that it works. And especially when we can't investigate, especially a spontaneous pregnancy where we have no ability to do any testing, or, you know, and it can just feel so, the onus always seems to fall on the woman that, you know, we've done something. And, you know, I think I'm understanding from you that there's very, very rarely a time that you've done something that's caused the end of your pregnancy. Isn't that right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, very often if let's say you go to your doctors with, and you're presenting, maybe you have diabetes, nobody will say you have diabetes because you stress too much or because you drank coffee. Like people, it's a medical condition. It's something that's happening to your body, and miscarriages and pregnancy losses are similar to that. There is something going on that needs investigating, and if you find the issue, then that can help with future pregnancies, to help protect future pregnancies. Some people do find out the reason why, but like we say, it's often if it's on the earlier side. I think if you're having what we kind of call a late miscarriage, you do have access to more testing, but yeah, it is one of those things that sometimes you just don't find out why.
And even when we do find out why, it's very rarely a behavior or something that could have been avoided. All right, so now that we have some understanding of the mechanics of miscarriage, I would love, Caroline, for you to tell us your story. Tell us about your experience with this.
First of all, thank you so much for having me. Am I audible enough?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm from Kenya, like the lovely intro, Cassie, you did. And we found out we were pregnant pretty early, a year into our marriage. And I did have the missed miscarriage or threatened miscarriage, sort of like a scare at around 6 weeks. However, I went and met with my doctor, and I went for an ultrasound, and a word that all of us are familiar with is I was told the pregnancy was viable, which is usually such a term that I'm not particularly fond of. But then I went on with the pregnancy. I was put on some bed rest and some hormonal meds. And the pregnancy went all the way until 20 weeks and a couple of days. However, at 16 weeks, I just felt absolutely sick. All the relief that I had from, the nausea, and I was feeling more energetic after the 12-week mark, all of a sudden at 16 weeks, all the other symptoms came back and I was feeling consistently sick. But unfortunately, the doctors couldn't figure what was wrong, and I had a lot of fever. And then just one night, or when I'd already hit the 20-week mark, I went into labor. Of course, that was my first pregnancy. So back then, I sort of just thought I could only describe it at the time as, really bad cramps. So I didn't know that I had gone into labor. And when I got to the hospital, they did everything they could to stop the labor, because I remember that my gynecologist saying, if the water breaks and there's really no going back, we have to deliver this baby. And that's exactly what happened. The next, it took about like 4 or so hours, but my water broke and I didn't even get a chance to go into the labor ward. I delivered there right in my hospital bed, and it was such a blurry moment for me, because this is not how I had envisioned birth, And I did though get an opportunity to see our daughter, and she was super small. And I'm really also grateful that my gynecologist gave me that choice. Like, now looking back and having worked with so many women, it was such a crucial moment to be part of. And that was my first experience. We lost our daughter at 20 weeks, and I think it was 4 days. So I'm usually right there on the verge of late miscarriage. Is it a stillbirth? So I completely get what Hazel was talking about. I was given about, we did find out later on, probably a week or so, that it was listeria. And I felt really, really guilty, I will be honest, because it felt like there's something I'd eaten. And all the doctors were talking about, we've read about this, we've studied it. We, like in med school, but we've just never seen a case of it in real life. And so it was kind of ironic, because this whole time they couldn't put me on strong medication, or especially antibiotics. Until then we lost the baby is when they now felt like, the pregnancy is no longer in the way. So I was put on really strong antibiotics, and I was in hospital, admitted for quite a bit, about a week. And so when I came to, everything was okay physically, and I was given another, 3 months just for the system to reset. I unfortunately had an early miscarriage at 8 weeks the year after. And I don't know whether to pause here, Cassie, because my story kind of feels like a mix of stuff, because there's us guys feeling that we don't want to try anymore after the second loss, and taking a break for a year, and then coming back and feeling like, okay, I think our hearts are ready for this, and then trying to get pregnant, and all of a sudden we couldn't, which was never an issue before with the first 2 pregnancies. And then about 10 months in or a year in, going to the doctor, and we've had the same doctor over the years, who ended up being such a huge support for Still a Mom when I founded it. But back to the story, really, it's more going through all the tests, finding out that I had blocked tubes. Both my tubes were blocked. And again, we could never figure this out, because you've been pregnant before. What exactly caused this? And seeking several opinions, medical opinions, and being told, IVF really here is the only situation that could help you out. Because even if we do, in fact, go on with surgery and we unblock the tubes, there's really no guarantee that you will conceive. And I think for me, this was sort of like hitting rock bottom, if I may say so, because the first 2 losses felt like, it was really a difficult moment to go through. But there was a possibility that I would never have kids. And I've met so many moms who admit to me the same way I felt. During my first pregnancy, I was not particularly excited. Like, I wasn't really I hadn't really looked forward to being a mom. And I hear this is really different for so many women. There are people who really felt like they were desiring to be a mom, but it was never really the case for me. I knew it would happen to me at some point in life. But after the second loss, I really wanted a baby. So to get to this place where I was being told that, there's a possibility we may never have children, it was really, really devastating. And then, came the IVF cycle and all the financial, physical, and mental stresses that come with it. And that then again failed, and it just felt like I couldn't catch a break. So I think I'm just gonna pause here because there's so much to talk about, but just to give context of where I've been.
And, you know, like so many of us who do the work that we do, it is so extraordinary that you take that experience and that you started Still a Mom, that you decided to channel your heartbreak into helping other people. That is what I think all of us, all of the people that are running this event today and tomorrow, that's where we come from too. You've walked a path and you want to make it better for the next woman, and that is an extraordinary thing. And I'm very grateful that there are people like you in the world, and I thank you for that. Kavita, I wonder if you would share some of your story with us.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me, and thank you for joining today. I'm sorry for everyone's loss, and Caroline, your story. I also, as Cassie did a great job of our introduction, I unfortunately had 2 consecutive miscarriages. My husband and I were married for 3 years when we decided we wanted to start trying for a baby. And I knew that there was a possibility of having a miscarriage because my sister had had a miscarriage. But I think when you're in that space, you don't really think about loss. And although I feel like my first miscarriage, I was quite headstrong about, I had no idea that, you know, there was something called a miscarriage, because even though I had spoken about miscarriage, it was only in the context of bleeding and, you know, passing your baby. So I feel like I was quite isolated in the beginning about, you know, miscarriages, and then obviously to go and have 2 consecutive miscarriages was really difficult. And unfortunately, because I had miscarriages, I ended up having D&Cs to remove the baby and tissue. So, which actually then it caused other problems, and I effectively had adhesions, which is called Asherman syndrome. So it was really difficult, I think, by the second kind of miscarriage, because I had then had no period, so I wasn't ovulating. I had no clarity on what was going to kind of be the path forward, similar to kind of what Caroline said. Like, she just came to this part where, like, you just feel like, will I have a baby? And then unfortunately I then went on to have a 3rd loss, which ended up in termination for medical reasons, because of a fetal anomaly. And again, I opted for a D&C, but, you know, it comes with so much other complexities, because again, I kind of had the risk of having adhesions again, or going back in my process of having a baby. So yeah, that's kind of the outline of my story.
Thank you for sharing that with us. You know, no 2 miscarriages are alike. There's just so many different factors and people's responses to them. And, you know, the fact that you're able to speak with us about it is really extraordinary. And I thank you for that. Nikki, I would love to hear about some of your work working with bereavement and your work as a midwife around the topic of miscarriage.
Sure, Beth, thank you for having me, first of all, and thank you for everyone sharing their stories. From a midwife point of view, I think we all need to share more of these sorts of things, because it educates us as the people who are meant to be there to support you. Like you mentioned, I am the lead bereavement midwife in King's College here in Dubai. We have set up a bereavement service. My history is UK training. I worked in Manchester, and it has a base for the Tommy's team. So I think in my training, in my work, I was exposed to bereavement care very early on, and it became something that I just, in a strange way, I loved that part of midwifery. I thought, like, there's such scope to make changes and to support women. When I moved out here, obviously very different culture surrounding birth in general and pregnancy, and this part of care, of perinatal care, was non-existent. It was almost not spoken about, a bit taboo. People don't want to feel like they're upsetting someone, like professionals, or they don't want to feel bad themselves. And it just had this tendency to be brushed under the carpet. Nobody was really showing a lot of compassion, a lot of kindness or understanding on a general scale. So I was very lucky to meet Lala, small MIT, very, very early on when I arrived here, and learned a lot from her, as well as my kind of midwifery training. So that led us to set up this bereavement service. We do have quite a large focus around miscarriage, early stillbirth, because we know that this is an area which is completely disregarded. People often don't know what causes are, especially professionals. A lot of them respond to facts, not feelings. But the reality is we need to work with feelings and not facts surrounding this, because as Hazel mentioned, we may never know the root cause for people's loss. So we actually need to approach it very differently. Our focus specifically for me is about the holistic care, the support throughout the birth and the postnatal period. You are postnatal. You don't, and that's a very big misconception that I found as a midwife. People following miscarriage or early stillbirth, this word of viability. Oh, well, baby wasn't 24 weeks. She's not postnatal. Absolutely the wrong path to go down. So we have we're reframing how people look at miscarriage now from a professional point of view. We are taking a very, very almost structured training approach to how do we speak to families about this? Not just women, grandparents, anyone who's there. Who are they? How's their mental well-being as a unit? So we're trying to kind of really do this holistic sort of overview, but it's that immediate care and not trying to just rush through it and finish with this patient, because understanding how the spectrum of emotions change, and women will start off at one point and they may travel to this point, but then actually a day later you can go back over here. So we're trying to kind of educate our staff and generally change the culture to understand that this is a spectrum that we move along the whole time. That's grief, that's loss, generally speaking. So that's kind of my involvement. I'm one of the team of 4. We're all UK trained midwives, actually, by coincidence, and we are 24-hour service for the women who need us. We are not. It's not a chargeable service. It's not. We just come in, and whether someone wants to talk to us or not, we're there. We can just be around. We can help support the midwives and the nurses. And I feel like that for me as a midwife, that is our biggest challenge, is to support them, to support women and families. And I think that's where we make the change from my sort of professional standpoint. This is where we make the change, because if we make that standard care, it will just integrate and filter down through everything. And we want people to have that sort of unwavering support.
I mean, that's extraordinary. And I know I had nothing like that when I had my miscarriage and my D&C. And, people were were kind, but they were not checking in on my grief process. And, you know, they were being nice to me while I was there in my appointments, and then I left, and then I never spoke to anybody ever again. And, you know, it would have been extraordinary to have had that kind of support. And, you know, I think a lot of people don't know that that is support that is available. So it's, you know, that seems to be a mission that we can all be on, to help raise awareness that there is such a thing as looking after our emotional and mental health after these, and not just our physical health, and not just getting our bodies back and getting ready to have another one and move on, but to actually care for our grief and respecting that grief is a process. And like you say, it's not linear. We can feel differently about it. You know, we've heard that on some other sessions, even so far this morning, that people are fine with something and then they understand it, and intellectually they understand, well, there was a chromosomal thing and that's not, and then, you know, the next minute you're like, oh, it's my baby. And, you know, it is a very difficult thing. And we're, you know, responding to also being wives and also being daughters, which brings me to something that I've always been curious about with other people, and that is, when you were experiencing your miscarriages, did you tell anyone about it? Were you sharing that, other than with, you know, your husband or your partner? Did you talk about your miscarriage? Do you remember talking about other people's miscarriages before you had yours? Was miscarriage part of your experience of the world before you experienced it yourself? Or did you, you know, do you find that when you told people, if you ever bring up miscarriage and people tell you, oh, I had one too, and, you know, I know that I experienced that when I did tell people I had a miscarriage, so many people said to me, oh yeah, I did too. And I thought, why are none of us talking? Why are we all having these miscarriages alone in the corner when this is something kind of universal? Do you have any memory of what you thought about miscarriage before you had a miscarriage?
I can start. So I think I mentioned my sister had one, so I did know that miscarriage can happen. I wasn't really aware of the statistic. I wasn't really aware of the process. I just knew that my sister had one. And this is my sister. I can speak to my sister about anything. But we didn't explicitly talk about miscarriage. I was there for her and I checked in on her, but I was also, because I had not experienced this, there was no way for me to kind of penetrate and understand how she was feeling. So, and like, when it happened to me, obviously she was there for me in a different way, but I also felt bad that I wasn't able to give her that support when she was going through that. And I remember she just said, like, I don't want to talk to anyone. I don't really want to, like, I just want to kind of zone out of the world, which is exactly kind of how I felt as well in the beginning. But I wish, like you said, other women just speak more about this, even about the types of miscarriage, because there's not just one type of miscarriage. So women can have so many different types of miscarriages. So yes, like, I did know that it can happen and it existed, but to the extent that it did happen and to what I went through, especially having a missed miscarriage, which I had no idea. I like obliviously went into a 12-week scan thinking my baby was fine and I was pregnant. And, you know, I don't think it registered in me that there would be a bad outcome at that scan. I genuinely just went in and was like, yeah, I'm ready to see my baby. And maybe it was the naivety of like first pregnancy. Like I think Caroline also said, like, she wasn't overly excited about the pregnancy, and I think I was a bit of both. I was excited, but then I was also really scared, like, how am I going to become a mum? I think those were the things that kept going around in my mind, like, oh my god, how am I going to look after a baby? And I was a little bit scared. So I think, you know, because I had no idea that this could happen, I walked into that scanning room just completely oblivious.
Mm.
Wow. On my end, it was a little bit like you, Kavita, but a little bit different at the same time. Before I was pregnant, I had never, literally never heard of the word miscarriage. Like, I had no idea that that was one of the outcomes of a pregnancy, a possible outcome. And I remember when it happened to me and I was discharged and I was back home, and you know, I got medical leave because I really didn't qualify for maternity leave per se, but I was home from work and with no baby, and you know, no, at the time I wasn't looking to go back to work. I remember like really deep diving on Google and doing so much research. Like, how am I hearing about miscarriages for the first time at my big age, you know? And getting in and finding out what we were talking about, 1 in every 4. And I was like, wait a minute, that sounds really high. So how do I not know about this? But then at the time I was running a blog, and I remember feeling like, is there like support out there? Are there support groups? Is there counseling? Is there therapy? What choices are there out there? And I just couldn't get any, especially in Kenya at the time. And I did write a blog post, not really, and shared my story, but not really to, you know, share what had happened to us per se, but asking, do you guys know of places that somebody can get support? And my comment section went crazy. And instead of, you know, there was absolutely no one who was saying, hey, check these people out, they usually offer this service. It was the other way. It was a lot of Me Too stories of people who had gone through it, or they knew somebody. It was men who were telling me about their wives. It was just like, there were so many people now who were telling me that they'd gone through the same thing. And it's been like clockwork. Every room where I get to and I share my story, without fail, there's going to be at least an 1/8 of the audience will walk up to me and they will know somebody, or they themselves have gone through it.
And why do we think that is? Why don't we share this really fundamental, primal, intimate thing that so many of us are experiencing? Do you have some ideas about why we don't talk about it?
Well, I think you've hit the right words, right? As in, it's intimate, it's personal. So a lot of people don't share because they feel like, you know, they're the only people going through it. It's very personal. Why would I want to share this with someone? They would, like, as in, it almost becomes a little bit, am I attention seeking? Especially in my culture, coming from an Asian background, it's almost seen as embarrassing and shameful that you've not been able to hold a pregnancy. And even, you know, some of my aunties actually opened up to me, and this is kind of going through the generations, and saying like, you know, I found it really difficult to conceive, and you just would never have heard that conversation if I didn't say anything in the room. And it's really sad because they just obviously felt that there was a big barrier to not share, and you know, they felt shame, embarrassment, you know, like they couldn't be open with themselves. And I think also partly men also back in kind of the cultural kind of generation as well were ashamed of it. So again, it was even more kind of hidden. So I just think it's very difficult to share, especially for the older generations. But even now, like, you know, like Caroline said, it's 1 in 4. That's so many women. But why is it still so hidden? And maybe because now I've been a part of this community, I feel like I hear it more and I hear stories more. But it's still not at the top of everyone's agenda. It's still kind of, oh, it may have to happen to me a few times, or I may not be able to go through, you know, I've had a few failed cycles before I start telling my story. And I just feel like, why can't women come out at the beginning and just say, I need help, or I'm struggling, or, you know, this is happening to me, why me? Because these are all the things that I hear from women in the community, whether it's miscarriage, TFMR, baby loss in general.
And fertility struggles, people trying to get pregnant, that there is something that is very shameful about these things that so very many of us experience. That's really quite heartbreaking, because we often do feel better when we share and when we have other people's experience reflected back to us, and we realize, well, we're not alone having this experience. This is a universal experience amongst women, and has been as long as there have been women. And it's very sad how often we are asked to endure this heartbreak on our own, when there are people who are willing to help us feel better about it. I mean, to speak to someone like Nikki, you'd have to admit that you're having this situation and make yourself vulnerable to asking another person who you might not know to come into this most intimate, dark moment of your life and help you. That's not something that women are trained to do. We are told, you are strong, you'll do it, you take care of it, you run the house, you run the family. Your pain has to happen over there in silence, and how detrimental that is to our mental health and our growth and our ability to be all of the things that society asks for women to be, and also shoulder this very difficult thing by themselves. I find really heartbreaking. And I wonder.
Sorry to interrupt you. Go on.
Please.
I've noticed though that there is, and this is a positive thing, there's been a change over time. So to begin with, I think it's an entire motherhood journey that for a very long time was either over glamorized, because even when you do in fact have a baby, you're like, holy crap, nobody told me how hard this is, the way the night feeds and the feeding, and you're like, it's always, everyone looks to be nailing it. Am I the only one who's struggling, So I feel like the entire journey towards being pregnant and then motherhood has in the past been really just surrounded by this coolness and glamour, and everyone has it together. But I feel like that has been broken very effectively over the last couple of years by our generation, the generation that is coming, where people are willingly sharing their struggles, postpartum depression, baby blues, the photos that are not edited, the real motherhood story where the house is full of toys and stuff like that, the real, how exactly the motherhood journey is. And I also would speak to this as the founder of Still a Mom, and working with so many families over the years, is what I realized when I originally began. When I would ask people, how did you find out about us? They'd share with and say, oh yeah, I saw you on the TV and you were talking about XYZ. It was mostly that. But that 3-4 years in, I would ask the very same question, and I'd say, so how did you find out about Still a Mom? And then it became that, oh, a friend of mine told me about you. And that for me was such an interesting measure of impact, because basically people were having coffee and somebody said, I lost a baby, and somebody at the table said, oh, you should talk to these people, they do XYZ, And I think while it's not progressing as fast as we would like, there's some progress and towards the positive, which is a good thing.
Yeah, and I agree. I'd say as well, with the generational and the cultural influence, very much my grandmothers wouldn't talk about loss. Nobody would talk about loss. Loss was, and I know that kind of culturally in this region of the world as well, it can still be a stigma, and loss at any stage of a pregnancy is, we move that aside and let's move on. And I also think as healthcare technology advances as well, we learn a lot more. We learn a lot more about our bodies. We learn a lot more about, something that 50 years ago you wouldn't have been able to test for, we can now test for. And it's having that conversation and that narrative. And like Nikki said, then that filters through. The more you talk about something, the more you hear about something, the more it is normalized. And that can only be a good thing. You know, there's nothing negative that's going to come out of talking about loss, but then it can also be a self-preservation thing. You know, I know people that don't want to share their loss because they're worried that it's going to upset their family members, or they're going to feel let down by their family members. They're going to, you know, they're worried about how their loss is going to impact someone else as well. And that can be also quite a difficult obstacle to get around.
Which is another typical thing that we put on women, that, you know, you are responsible for other people's feelings and mental health, and that's your job, not to upset other people, which is a whole nother panel we should do sometime about how we expect women to be. I wonder how your experience with miscarriage has changed the way you feel about pregnancy. When somebody tells you that they're pregnant, do you have a feeling about it that you might not have had before, or with subsequent pregnancies that you had or aspire to have? How has your experience changed the way you view pregnancy and parenthood? I mean, I'll say something about that. You know, I had my first IVF was, I was pregnant with actually twins. The first one I had lost already by my second scan. There were 2 heartbeats at the first scan and just 1 by the second. And the other one was going fine. And, you know, it was another 8 weeks until I had a scan that told me that that heartbeat had stopped. So I had 12 weeks of, you know, knowing I had this baby and thinking about, well, at Christmas, it'll be this age. And then, you know, on my first birthday, it'll be this time of year. And, you know, and it doesn't take long to imagine a whole life, you know, and especially walking around for, you know, a month and a half thinking you're going to have this baby. That's a long time to build this world. When I lost that baby and I was pregnant again, several months later, again with twins, I didn't relax. I couldn't. Every scan was full of anxiety. I thought when I got to the point where I lost that first pregnancy and I passed it, that I would relax, and I never really did. And now I have almost 7-year-old twins who are very much in this world, and I still often catch myself looking at them and thinking, thank you for continuing to grow and for being born and for being strong. You know, it has changed the way I view my children. It's certainly changed the way I experienced their pregnancy and their birth. And, you know, I was not prioritizing my own health and safety throughout their birth. I let an epidural wear off, and I was feeling a tremendous amount of pain because I didn't want to interrupt anyone that was taking care of the babies, because that was the most important thing. I really put myself distant third to, you know, these 2 babies I was growing. So and when someone tells me they're pregnant, especially when someone tells me I'm going to have a baby, I always think, maybe, you know, hopefully. But it has changed me forever. And I think that naivete that I had before a miscarriage, I will never recapture. And I wonder if anyone can speak to having an experience like that.
Yeah, no, that really kind of resonates. I don't think I can. I didn't relax in my pregnancy with Ariana, which was successful. But I think even in the second pregnancy, I was like holding my breath before the scan. You know, they say you get scan anxiety. I had all of that. Like, I was pacing up and down the waiting room, like waiting to go in, thinking, what's going to happen? What are they going to say? You're like, I know this sounds really crazy, but I used to look at the screen, the ultrasound screen, as if I knew what to look for and what was going on, as if, yeah, I like, and even my doctor, she used to say to me, like, you're an expert now, why don't you just do the scan? But honestly, you come to that level of anxiety that you just are like, is there a heartbeat? Like, and I remember throughout my pregnancy, whether it was a 30+ week scan, the first thing I asked was, is there a heartbeat? And like you said, Cassie, like that whole naivety was just gone. And I almost feel a bit sad for myself because I didn't get to enjoy that pregnancy because I was so scared throughout. I don't think I can barely remember moments in those 40 weeks that I was happy and relaxed, and honestly that it still upsets me now that I'm like that. And even when other people announce pregnancies, like you said, it's always, I just say to them, oh, like, you know, that's great, but in my head I'm praying that they have a baby that's healthy and that comes out alive. And again, you know, people used to ask me like, oh, like, you know, you're due soon or whatever, and I just used to be like, yeah, maybe we'll have a baby. And so I just don't think it ever goes away.
How do you feel about this concept that we shouldn't say we're pregnant until after 12 weeks or into the second trimester? Do you have any feelings about that custom?
I think it's not a good idea. It's a wrong way of thinking, and I completely agree with Kavita, and I feel the very same way with I felt with my pregnancy, my third pregnancy, that went okay, but you know, bed rest and the fear and you know, and going to the washroom and expecting to see, you know, blood, you know, and expecting to hear, I'm really sorry, there's no heartbeat, as scans. So I get it, but at the very same time, I remember when I would be like 34 weeks pregnant, and at this point I was already running Still a Mom, and you know, and somebody would reach out to me and they'd say, you know, we lost our baby at 36 weeks, and for me it felt like, oh my God, there's no point of relief, you know. I'd always hear someone who's lost a baby older than where I was at the pregnancy, you know, and even stillborns and older children that would come to us for support, and you know, and we were counseling or we were sitting with in support groups. But that said, I think, and this is a realization that I have had with my child, I am completely grateful for the fact that I have my son now for 5 years that I have had him. But I'm also very aware there are no guarantees. Just because we have been through the things we have been through, of course, there's no guarantees for anybody else. But even though those of us who've been through this heartbreak, there's also no guarantee that we get to have our babies, you know, until we die or until they are 50, or I mean, there's nowhere it is written that we have been promised, you know. And so I'm completely aware of the concept of time and grateful for it. And I think we should go at every pregnancy with that attitude. So if you want to share your news at 6 weeks, by all means share your news. Enjoy your baby bump photo shoots. Really truly feel the moment of the pregnancy. And if yes, you know that there are people, if you share the news, they will, you know, just be a buzzkill about it, then don't share with those ones who will give you negative energy. But if you'd like to share, I think it's not fair to let fear get in the way, because then we miss out. We miss out on the enjoyment of the pregnancy.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree as well. Like, as in, I have my own reasons for probably not wanting to share till a lot later, personally, because after my termination, for medical reasons, I would personally just need to have tests come back, which aren't available until after 12 weeks or 15 weeks. So, but I 100%, I would love to embrace a pregnancy, or I would love to hear other people embrace their pregnancy, enjoy moments, capture those bump pictures, you know, watch yourself grow over the time. And but it is just such a difficult, like, it's a difficult share, especially once you've been through loss. But I think it would be so amazing and encouraging for people to share, because if you do have a loss subsequently, people are there to support you. And so I do feel like, you know, I did share with my family on all my pregnancies, my immediate family, and I'm glad that I did, because I needed them. Like, as in, if I had just told my husband and that's it, I don't know how I would have then confronted everyone with, I was pregnant, but now I'm not pregnant, and this is what's happened in between, because that itself is such a difficult conversation to have.
I think from sort of a midwife, from my point of view, a lot of people say they come to see me and I say, oh, is this your first baby? And they say, yeah. And I say, oh, is this your first pregnancy? Oh, no, I had like 2 miscarriages. And I think sometimes like kind of, you know, not discussing it, not announcing it till 12 weeks, this rigid 12-week rule that seems to have just materialized in our just general culture of pregnancy. It almost, sometimes it kind of doesn't validate the fact that that was a pregnancy that was lost, because they're like, oh, well, you know, I've heard people say, oh, like Hazel mentioned, at least it was before 12 weeks. Like, why is it this magic 12 weeks? If people feel comfortable personally to be sharing when that test says positive and embracing that, as Caroline said, it does kind of open up dialogue for us when things don't go as planned as well. So as Caroline was saying, we are progressing slowly, but maybe that is something that will become more of a talking point throughout pregnancy for women.
I think that's a really good point, Nikki, especially when it comes to talking about like which number pregnancy. So I've had 4 pregnancies, and a lot of people ask me, oh, is this your first baby? And I find it really difficult to say no, because it's just culture, right? Like, as in, but it eats me up inside, because I do want to sit here and say, actually, no, she's not my first baby. And but then it's also saving your face and saving that person from feeling like absolute crap that they've asked this question. So you're almost, again, saving everyone else before your own feelings. But honestly, like, I think it's so difficult, especially, I think I only really came to terms with calling my babies once I had my 3rd loss, which sounds bizarre, but I think, again, with miscarriage and this whole 12-week milestone, I didn't call them babies. I just said, oh, I had a miscarriage, I had 2 miscarriages. But now I'm like, no, I had babies, I was pregnant and they were mine. But as in, before that, I genuinely was a bit like, I had a loss.
Ladies, I want to thank you so much for your honesty, your openness, your willingness to share some of the hardest things that we will experience in this life with us today, with each other, with people you don't even know who've called in. I just think that courage is exactly the kind of thing that women are really good at and should be celebrated for. And I thank you for your time this morning and the way that you each spoke so beautifully about the work that you do in supporting women and your experiences as mothers. It's meant a lot to me. And I just want to say that I think that you're all extremely extraordinary women, and I'm really proud that I got to spend this time with you today. So thank you very, very much. And I hope that you all have beautiful days. And I am so pleased that you shared some of your day with me today. Thank you.
Thank you, Cassie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.